thank you everybody for joining today, and thank you for having me, and for Katie and Gina for coordinating with me. Super appreciate it. As Tamara said, my name is Ruthie Gold. I'm with the Yale program on climate change communication, and I'll share my screen just to get the presentation up and running. But yes, here we go. And our presentation today is going to be called Climate Change in the Classroom, Tools for Educators and Learners and the Rest of Us. But just to back up and give some context on the Yale program on climate change communication, our mission, as the name suggests, is to advance the science of climate change communication, and through that research and work to help leaders and the public communicate more effectively about climate change, and also to build just a stronger and better public knowledge and awareness of climate change risks and opportunities. And my role specifically is that I help YPCCC, the Yale program on climate change communication, think about how to make all of their incredible data and tools and research accessible to an educator and student audience. And a lot of that has involved talking to lots of people in the climate change and education and environmental education fields. I actually spoke to Tamara. She was one of the first people who I spoke with. And this culminated in us developing a suite of activities around our research and tools that can be used by educators directly in the classroom, but I think that there's definitely application in non-formal educator settings as well, like in museums and things of that nature. So today I'm gonna very quickly give you an overview of some of these tools and research in the context of these activities. And of course, if you have any questions or anything like that, I'm happy to answer them as they come up. I know we'll have some time at the end for questions as well. And I can also drop my email address in the chat at the end. And definitely happy to work with you and answer questions beyond the scope of this very short and small presentation. So I actually wanted to start with, a story. And I'm going to play you a story through a part of the Yale program on climate change communication, which is called Yale Climate Connections. And Yale Climate Connections is the media arm of the Yale program on climate change communication. I've got the page pulled up here. And so it's this really, really fantastic place where we produce all sorts of media about climate change. We've got articles, we've got series like this series called Eye on the Storm here. But my favorite part about Yale Climate Connections is that every single day, Yale Climate Connections produces a 90-second radio story about climate change. So you heard both of those facts correctly. Every day, 90 seconds, a radio story about climate change. And they're not just stories about climate change science. They're climate change as it relates to all different sorts of topics. So just to give you a flavor of what some of those topics are. There are stories about climate change as it relates to arts and culture, education, food and agriculture, national security, religion and morality. So it's really just a fantastic platform that provides a lot of really great, relevant, bite-sized, manageable entry points for students when you're introducing them or talking to them about climate change, but also just, in general. And so I want to play you a story that one of the radio stories that I pulled. And what I'm going to do first, actually, is I'm going to put a question in the chat. And so as we are listening to this story, I want you to be thinking about these questions. So what does this story remind you of? Does it remind you of other stories or other things that you've learned about or experienced in your community? And then after we listen to the story, you can either type your thoughts or responses in the chat, or feel free to raise your hand and share out that way. So let me pull up the story. It's called Little Haiti Sits on Prime High Ground. This is a story from back in 2019, and super easy. You just press play and it goes, and then we've got the transcript here of the radio story as well. So that's really great for learners to be able to experience these stories through multiple modes. So here is the story.
I'm Dr. Anthony Lazowitz, and this is Climate Connections. Almost 40 years ago, Marlene Bastien fled a brutal dictatorship in Haiti. She resettled in an impoverished area of Miami that came to be known as Little Haiti. She says refugees worked hard to buy homes and build a community there.
Out of sheer resilience and determination, working oftentimes 12 or 18 hours a day.
Little Haiti became a thriving community, but Bastien says many of its longtime residents are being priced out as wealthier people and developers move in. She says climate change is helping drive this gentrification. Little Haiti is further inland and several feet higher in elevation than areas like Miami Beach. So, as sea levels rise,
Those with influence and affluence are seeking higher grounds.
Bastien directs the Family Action Network movement. The nonprofit is fighting to ensure that development plans for Little Haiti include affordable housing and support for local businesses. She says it's critical that community voices are heard.
The homeowners, the business owners, those who built their neighborhood out of sheer resilience, determination, and sacrifices and strength and blood and tears must be part of the dialogue. They must be at the table.
Climate Connect.
All right, so I'll leave the text up, but when you're ready, put in the chat, or again, feel free to raise your hand to share out kind of your thoughts regarding the story and the question that I put in the chat. So what does the story remind you of? Other stories you've heard or other things you've learned about or experienced in your community? James, this is very familiar to you. Do you want to unmute yourself and expand on that a little bit? Oh, you're muted.
Sure. Thank you again. I'm sorry.
Sure.
That's twice I did that. So another part of my life, but not it's becoming more connected, is working just as originally just as a person who lives in Oakland, California, of seeing how things happen with the environment and trees in particular. But then it becomes clear Oakland is a place that we see what goes on throughout California. What I'm getting is how the environment is treated for people of color and people who are poor compared to white people who are rich. So maybe just to give us a quick sense. Inside Oakland is a small town called Piedmont, which is very wealthy and very white, and it is very well done with trees, and it has no law that says you have to protect the trees. The people just do it, right? They want to. But in Oakland, which already has very low tree canopy in the flatlands where the poor and black people and Latino people live, already has it low, and in the last 5 years has lost 25% of its trees. And the city is making this happen. They are backing it up. They're making deals with developers. They're protecting the trees for the wealthy people get it, but for the others don't. And what I'm getting to is environmental racism and environmental justice. And you think this is a city that's known for progressivism. You know, there's more nonprofits in Oakland probably than any place other than D.C., you know, that are based there, and yet. And it's a question of, like, does this even make the news? Do people even know about it? That's a lot of the problem is it's like not even in people's picture. So it's something to do. I know that's not a direct connection, but the question of environmental racism is something extremely familiar with. Thanks.
Yeah, no. And, you know, you said that, you know, you don't think it's directly connected, but really it is. And that's kind of the purpose of, you know, asking the question to think about, okay, well, you know, you're hearing this story that's taking place in this one part of the country, but that doesn't mean that, you know, we can't identify with it and relate it to our own experiences and our own observations in our own lives. And, you know, a lot of other people have been in the chat observing the same thing. It's similar to gentrification stories in other cities. It brings up a lot of the social justice and environmental justice and climate justice issues related to climate change. So yeah, thank you for sharing that and for kind of summarizing other things that were being put in the chat. And I asked that question specifically because it comes from one of our activities, and perhaps our most basic activity, which is a question bank. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show that to you. So, and I'll show you how to get there as well. I just have a quick question. Are there like random gray boxes in everybody's screens that are blocking your view at all? No? Okay, great. Sometimes that happens when I share my sound, but I'm glad it didn't happen this time. So how to get to this question bank and our other resources and activities. So this is the homepage of the Yale program on climate change communication, climatecommunication.yale.edu. And you'll see right here, we've got a tab for educators grades 6 through 12. So if we click on that, we get to this page, and here are all of these activities. And so what I'll do is I'll show you the question bank and show you kind of how it structures for the rest of the activities. So if you click on an activity, you come to a page that looks like this. You'll see a button to download a for educators page, a for students page. You get some background. You get to see right away the goals and the standards that this activity connects to. So that's right there in front of you. And then I'll just open each of these PDFs really quick, just so you can get a sense of what they look like. So our for educators pages, when you open them, here you have the goals and standards again. And this might be more directly applicable to an in-classroom teacher who might want to like have this with them as they're, teaching a lesson or, trying to use it for a teacher observation or something, but certainly useful. And the grade level that it's targeted towards, the background again, description of the activity, what you can expect that your learners will take from this activity, and also some tips for success. So sometimes those tips for success will direct you to other activities that we have, or just make recommendations for pertinent things related to the activity. So that's kind of what the educator page for all these activities will look like. And then we have the for students page, and this one mostly it's very simple. It's just a question bank, so it's really mostly questions. I don't remember what number question it was, but the question that I asked you is in this question bank. Our other activities are generally much more dynamic, but we did think it was important to include just kind of a straightforward question bank, because as we were interviewing educators, something that they thought would be really useful was, just have a list of questions that teachers can really easily pull from. They can grab a story, really quickly use it as a do now in their class, or a bell ringer, or as an introduction to different climate change topics. And again, it's a really great way to help students relate climate change to themselves and to their own lives. Some of the other more dynamic activities related to Yale Climate Connections are, and I probably won't have time to really open them all up, but I'll just kind of touch on them briefly, is this climate change jigsaw. So it basically explains how teachers can facilitate, or educators can facilitate, breaking students up into groups and assigning them each a story and questions from the question bank, or just questions that they have. And there's a graphic organizer that students can fill out to help guide their discussion. And then a personal favorite of mine is this one. It's called Re-Representing a Climate Change Story. And this one, students will select a radio story to listen to, and then they actually are asked to first summarize the story to make sure they understand it, and then to think about how they can re-represent that story in a creative way. So, whether they want to write a poem about it, or, create a piece of art, whether it's a sculpture or a poster or a drawing. So really kind of motivating students to connect to climate change in a maybe atypical but meaningful way through creativity. So that's kind of our first platform, Yale Climate Connections, that we've created these activities around to help kind of frame student usage of our materials. The second, and thank you for dropping that link in the chat. The second piece of research that YPCCC has done that we've developed activities around are global warming's 6 Americas. And this research came from, and continues to come from, nationally representative survey samples, through which we've identified the 6 Americas, which are 6 unique audiences in the American public. And each of these audiences responds to issues of climate change in their own distinct way. So I'm just going to go through each of these 6 Americas very quickly now, and then we'll move into looking at a couple of the activities that go along with this. So the alarmed are, as you might imagine, very alarmed about climate change. They're very worried about it. It's real. It's a threat. It's happening now. It's having devastating impacts. We've got to do something now. We should have been doing things for a long time before this. They're ready to take action. And in many cases, maybe they already have. The concerned also, of course, believe that climate change is real and human caused. Perhaps they don't think that they personally will be affected in their lifetime, although maybe they do. And they're, very on board with, policies that promote adapting to climate change and mitigating climate change. Next, we have the cautious, who are starting to be maybe a little bit more skeptical. Maybe they understand that it's real, but aren't really sure about whether it's human caused or not. They're just maybe a little bit on the fence. The disengaged, this audience really has the least knowledge about climate change. They don't really know enough about it to make an informed opinion about climate change one way or the other. So that's kind of the hallmark of this audience. Next, we move into the doubtful, which again, as you might imagine, these folks are kind of a bit more skeptical about climate change. They're maybe not so sure that it's a real phenomenon. They probably don't think it's human caused. They're not really likely to be taking action or voting for representatives or policies to act on climate change. And then lastly, we've got our dismissives, and these guys are our most vocal audience against climate change. They are very confident that it is neither real nor human caused, and if anything, might be taking steps to actively oppose measures to address climate change. So those are the 6 Americas in a nutshell. And I would love to hear from you in the chat. What percentage of the American public right now do you think are alarmed? What percentage of the American public right now do you think are alarmed? Do you think it's like 10%, 30%, 70%? You could put it in the chat. Okay, Eric thinks 40%. Thank you for being brave and starting us off. Tamara thinks 12%, 30%, 20%. Ooh, 45. That's a little more optimistic, Tiffany. And then what percentage of the American public do you think is dismissive of climate change? Dismissive. So that was alarmed. What percentage do you think is dismissive? 10%, 8%. Any other guesses? 20%, that's a bit bigger, 10%. All right, so I will give the big reveal. So drum roll, please. As of December 2020, this is the breakdown. And so perhaps, for this particular audience who, are very much in the field and very, very connected to what's going on in the climate change world and sphere, this might be a little less surprising. But certainly when we've showed this to other teachers, there's a general reaction of surprise and hope, because people really don't realize just how much of the country is alarmed or at least concerned about climate change. It's a majority, and that these doubtful and dismissive groups really make up a very small percentage. Yes, Tucker Carlson, I'm sure we know exactly what category he's falling into. And so hopefully this graphic is, a really motivating, kind of empowering graphic to talk about climate change, because a phenomenon that we've identified is this thing called a climate spiral of silence. And it's this idea that people are so concerned that if they bring up climate change, people are going to react very negatively, or, shut them down or retaliate, what have you. So people don't talk about it. And then the more people don't talk about it, the more other people don't talk about it. And when people don't talk about it, nothing gets done to fix it. But really, if we talk about it, and make it a part of the normal conversation, the mainstream conversation, we're gonna get probably in all likelihood some very positive responses. So, I think that's a graphic that I always think is very valuable to show. And then this subsequent research after this initial research on the 6 Americas is, well, how do you communicate with these different audiences? Because that's really important, because you're not going to talk to Tucker Carlson in the same way you're going to talk to Tamra. So for the alarmed and concerned audiences, it's best to empower and direct them, give them actionable items, really concrete things to do to take steps towards climate solutions. The cautious and disengaged audiences, we found that showing the harm, explaining the facts, coming at this from a very pragmatic, logical standpoint is going to be the most effective. And for doubtfuls and dismissives, it's really important to show them why we know that climate change is real, and that information is coming from trusted sources to them, and ultimately to shrink their airtime, because it really just undermines the reality and all of the work that so many people are doing. And so now let's take a look at some of the activities that we've developed around the 6 Americas. So, I just showed you, a lot of kind of the graphic that's very data-based, very numbers-based. And one activity that we have is called Decoding the Data. And I'll show you the student page here. And what it does is it kind of shows students and gives them the opportunity to analyze graphics and graphs and data that we've taken from our own research, and to analyze that real data. And so it's giving them practice with critical thinking, data analysis skills, and also showing them this, very important real and surprising landscape. So we have a whole variety of different types of data and graphics for them to interpret through this activity. So that's one of them. And then for educators who are more interested in approaching this from kind of the communication and social side of things, we have an activity, where is it? Role play, 6 Americas, 6 Views on Global Warming. And this activity break students into groups where each student assumes one of the 6 Americas as a role. And then they get a scenario, and then they have to work through and write a script about how these different 6 Americas would engage with each other around this climate change scenario. So really getting students to think about, okay, well, even if I believe one thing, first of all, what is it like to kind of put myself in someone else's shoes? And what am I going to say to someone who's dismissive? And how's that going to be different from what I would say to someone who is, cautious or doubtful or concerned? So that's a really great way to kind of get that communication and the more social aspect of climate change. And something also that's this is less of an activity and more of a guide. We just call it Meet Global Warming 6 Americas. It's just kind of a intro. Who are the 6 Americas? Who are they? What are their beliefs? And what are the effective communication strategies? So that's kind of a really easy way to intro this. And something that we've done in the past, which has been really interesting, is we've introduced the 6 Americas to students and then had them think about, what are effective communication strategies that they think would apply to the different 6 Americas. And students are really intuitive and bright, and what they think of are often the strategies that we have found to be effective and proven effective in our professional research. So it's very empowering to them to then show students, well, actually what you're thinking is backed up by professional research that we do. So that's always a really exciting thing for students to be able to see. So those are our activities around the 6 Americas. And then I've got one more question for you. And it will seem random now, but I will show you how it's relevant in just a moment. So in the chat, one more percentage guessing question. What percentage of adults in Connecticut believes that schools should teach about global warming? So you can put in the chat your guesses. 80%, Ingrid, coming out strong. What else? 60, also pretty high. 85. All right, and I chose Connecticut just because YPCCC is, of course, in New Haven. But I'm going to show you how we can find that answer. And that leads us to our last tool that I'm going to show you and the activities that go along with it. And this last tool is called the Yale Climate Opinion Maps. And the Yale Climate Opinion Maps is an interactive map tool where you can explore how Americans' beliefs about climate change vary across the country. So you see here right now, we're on the quest, seeing the results of the question, what percentage of adults think that global warming is happening? But we have a whole list of questions here. So let's find the one that we were just thinking about. So schools should teach about global warming. And then we can search by county, by metro area, congressional district, state, or on a national level. So let's check out state and let's come over to Connecticut, highlight 80%. So those of you who are guessing that were correct. And you'll see that's +2 from the national average, which is 78%. And this is a really fascinating tool. I love it. I feel like you could spend hours just going down the rabbit hole exploring, what people think in different parts of the country about all of these different statements. And this, I like this question in particular because, on the whole, the responses are pretty positive. I mean, even in North Dakota, which I think is the lowest percentage of people who think that schools should teach about global warming, it's still well over 50%. So, when you're thinking about climate change communicating effectively around climate change, it's important to understand your audience. And this is a great tool to be able to do that. And it's great for students. It gives them the opportunity to practice manipulating a model. And again, like really utilizing that real-time data. And then they can apply it. You can have students design a climate change campaign or what have you. And this is a really useful tool for that. So what I will do, let's actually, no, we can do this. I'm going to drop this link in the chat so you can have it, and I'll have you open it up. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you one of the activities whose link I'll drop in the chat as well. And I'll have you do a couple of the questions just so you can kind of get a feel for that. So the activity that I'm going to drop in the chat is called Navigating the Yale Climate Opinion Maps. It's kind of like a structured, guided activity that helps students become familiar with this tool, which that could be a very overwhelming thing for a student to just see on a screen and be like, oh my gosh, this looks very complicated. So this guide helps them, kind of overcome that. And I'm going to have you do questions 4 and 5. And you can type, you'll see you can type right into the fields there. So you'll want to open up that link to the Yale Climate Opinion Maps, which is in the chat. And then in a separate tab, open this activity, and you can do questions 4 and 5, and then we'll come back together in just a couple of minutes. And even if you don't get a chance to do those 2 questions completely, it'll at least give you a little bit of a sense. So I'll give you 2 minutes. I'll give you another minute. All right. So even if you didn't get a chance to fully do those two questions, hopefully you at least got a sense for, how you could do those questions, and that you got to at least use the Yale Climate Opinion Maps tool a little bit. Another activity that I really like based on the Yale Climate Opinion Maps is this one called Climate Change Communication Investigation, that actually encourages students to get out and interview people in their community or their friends or their families using those questions from the Yale Climate Opinion Maps, analyze their own data, and then compare that to data from the Yale Climate Opinion Maps. So what I think is a great application of the Yale Climate Opinion Maps tool. And just a couple of quick things before we get to questions. There's this one, we kind of created a collection that we call backgrounders. So just as kind of resources for educators who maybe, don't have a big background in climate change education, but want to become more well-versed in that. So we have these backgrounders. There's external resources that list a lot of fantastic other organizations and sites, Clean included, actually, as ways where teachers can explore resources on climate change science and different climate change topics. We've got introductory essays about climate change topics. We've got a backgrounder about, what is a survey? So much of our work at YPCCC is based on survey research, but, how do you actually do that? So, we also thought it was important to get these kind of backgrounders in there, because climate change is such a big topic, and our area of expertise isn't the climate change science itself, but we want to make sure that we're giving people the opportunity to become comfortable with that aspect of climate change as well, especially educators. So the very last thing before questions is just a couple of fun cartoons from a resource called Cranky Uncle, which is an app actually that helps students learn, or anyone really learn about different kind of logical fallacies, and really think about and has them practice reacting to people who have logic like birds fly, so gravity is a hoax, you're jumping to conclusions. So that's another great resource to check out. And they have all these very kind of funny graphics as well. So it's cold, so global warming doesn't exist. Well, that's kind of like saying, well, it's dark, so the sun doesn't exist. So really kind of helping to develop those really important critical thinking skills in learners. And kind of here's what I was talking about before with the spiral of silence. No one is talking about climate change, so I won't bring it up. And so then no one else is going to talk about climate change because no one's bringing it up. And that is all. And so I would love to take some time for questions. I can start with James's question about, how does the makeup of public opinion, Six Americas compare to other times in history? That is a really, really interesting question. And so YPCCC, we only started doing this research in 2008. So we don't have a comparable paradigm for exploring that, but that could be a really, really interesting project to assign to learners. What did people think about this in different eras of time? What I will say, and actually I shouldn't have stopped sharing my screen, because there is something that I do want to show you. Let me just, okay, can we see the slides again? Okay, so something that is very, is it here? I think it's here. Our visualizations and data. There's a really great tool that came out pretty recently. It's called Explore Climate Change in the American Mind. And you can explore climate views over time. It's a more recent past type of thing. since 2008, since we started doing this research. But it's another really fantastic interactive tool where you can explore how people's climate views have changed over time, and you can manipulate, what it is you want to see. Is it their beliefs, risk perceptions? What questions do you want to explore? Like, oh, okay, well, we can take out these, and how have people thought about, global warming is harming the US now? And you can see over time, like, oh, wow, we really have this trend skewing upward. You can search by voter status. So it's really, it certainly doesn't dive super deeply into history like your question was asking, James, but it is a way to draw some comparisons over time. So I hope that that's helpful at least. Emily, go ahead. What's your question?
Hi, thanks Ruthie for sharing today. So mostly I work with the alarmed and concerned sections. And one of the things that we've noticed from a behavioral perspective for building agency and efficacy is that people feel discouraged, right? So really my work isn't trying to convince anybody to talk more about climate change or to talk about the segmentation, although I agree that the segmentation is a common misconception. Mostly what I've been looking at is trying to teach people how to improve positive outlier visualizations. So helping communities identify and amplify what's already working for mitigating and adapting to climate change. I guess I was wondering if there's some way to tie that methodology in with what you're already teaching so that we can cross-connect the work across communications departments better. Would you be open to that conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. And here, this is actually probably a good time to drop my email in the chat for anybody who wants to continue the conversation. And I think that that's a really important part of this movement, not working in silos and communicating across different organizations and organizations with various areas of expertise. And so, yeah, I think that would be fantastic.
Thank you, Ruthie. I'll follow up after then.
Awesome. Thanks, Emily. Frank, go ahead.
Okay. So one thing I'm really curious about, I really love your map, by the way, but have you folks considered including some demographics in there, like county employment rates, where people are getting where people are employed, where the big mines are, the big oil fields, so on?
Actually, I'm glad you asked. Let me share my screen. I keep saying, I'm just going to share it one more time. I should really just leave it up. So what we do have is climate views by demographics. Whoops. So that's this tab here. So it's not every single demographic that you just listed, but we do have, age, gender, race, political party, et cetera, et cetera. Through education, we have this legend, less than high school bachelors. So we do have we do have a lot of this in the context of different demographic data. I think we're always looking to expand that. And then, just because that is a question that gets asked a lot. And people it's really compelling to see, the breakdown of this in those different groups. And, especially over the last few years, there's been a lot of interest in, well, how do these beliefs break down across, political groups and political parties? So we have that on this tab as well. So definitely encourage you to explore that.
Okay.
And I can drop the link to this Explorer specifically into the chat. Yeah, no problem.
Katie.
Yeah, Katie.
Thanks. So I just thought Frank's question is one where, you could have somebody look at different data sets. Like we've been talking in a different project around climate resilience and looking at social vulnerability indices and other, what he was talking about with employment. I'm sure there's employment indices out there. And so I was like, oh, that'd be a cool thing to have a student, great idea for somebody to like dive into some of those like comparisons across data sets, even if you don't have them. But then it was like, I started thinking, you know, that's something that, I mean, it's fun to have different students do different things and, you know, keep that kind of on the classroom level. But I also just started thinking about, if students do projects like that, is there any way of communicating it back to YPCCC and like getting that information back out to people? Is that something you've thought about at all, connecting with students and teachers, of like, if there is some amount of work that's ever done that might be interesting to other folks out there?
That's
And totally fine
yeah.
if not, but just kind of like had a little brainstorm thought idea that I was like, oh,
Yeah,
I'd love to see that, but I don't have
I was
time
gonna
to dig
say
into
that sounds so interesting. Yeah, I mean, you know, one of these resources are all fairly new, and were all developed based on, again, interviews with classroom teachers, educators in the non-formal education space, people in climate organizations. So, you know, that's kind of the framework around which these were developed, but that's absolutely not to say that those activities are the only way to you know, use this research and these tools. So I think that's a fantastic idea. And one thing that we also did was we ran a pilot where we had teachers across the country, across different grade levels, use these, and we do have some examples of student work that we are trying to incorporate into the site, whether it's in the activities themselves, or, you know, if we're going to make a section of that page of the web page to be like, oh, you know, like personal experiences that teachers have had using these materials. So, you know, that's definitely something that we're open to. I think, you know, as you alluded to, Katie, it always comes down to a bandwidth issue, but you know, that is definitely something that we've talked about, of, you know, creating a section where we can highlight you know, teachers who've used not only the activities but gone above and beyond in really creative ways, like the way that you suggested. Yeah.
Ingrid?
Okay.
Yeah, well, you've partly just answered my question, but my question is, how are you getting feedback from teachers about your resources? Because we have a similar issue where we have resources online. We can see the analytics of how many people are downloading them, but it's usually just a handful of very enthusiastic teachers who contact us and say, oh, I love this, or I used it in this way. And then we don't know what teachers are doing, you know, the rest of the teachers are doing with our things, and we'd love to know. So I'm just curious what ways you have found effective to get feedback.
Yeah, so the pilot was really, really useful, and I cannot express enough how grateful I am to all of the teachers who were not only willing to participate, but did so and submitted extremely, extremely thoughtful feedback in the midst of very crazy time to be a teacher. So that was, I think, probably the most meaningful way that we've gotten feedback so far. On the page, on the For Educators page itself, there's a link to a Google survey, but I don't anticipate that being, you know, a very popular thing that teachers will use, you know, so I think that probably that won't be a very useful way of getting feedback. And, you know, that's definitely a question, you know, beyond the pilot that we're still exploring, you know, like, is it, you know, do we try and run multiple pilots where we're really targeting certain teachers and making sure that they're actually using these and getting that feedback? Is it presenting at conferences like the NAAE conference or the NSTA annual conference? But yeah, I wish I had like a silver bullet answer to that question, but that's definitely an ongoing challenge for us as well. And that's actually kind of where we're starting to shift our focus of, you know, the outreach that now has to go on. Like, now we have these activities. How do we make sure that they're getting into the hands of educators? And how do we determine, you know, A, if they're using them, and B, if you know, what they found useful, what they enjoyed, what they would do differently. And I see that there are some things going on in the chat. Yeah, time is definitely a problem. and they do need help. And that was something that was really big that we were keeping in mind. That was one of the questions that we asked in these interviews before we developed these resources. Like what do you need in order to be able to use our tools in your classroom? And the number one answer is, look, we just don't really have the time. So anything that's kind of grab and go that we can turn around and use the next day is going to be what's most useful. And in addition to that, the support that teachers require, that was kind of the reasoning behind those backgrounders that I showed you at the end. Just thinking of ways to make things easier and reduce the burden on teachers. But yeah, I mean, it's just the perpetual question for teachers, not only around teaching climate change, but just around teaching in general. So yeah, and the literature, I think, supports that as well. Challenges or barriers to teaching climate change: time and support, confidence in the topic. Those are all heavy hitters in the research.
Okay, any other questions? Well, Ruthie, this is all really fantastic. I can think of 2 different avenues that I might be able to use these, both in my undergraduate class. I teach the undergraduate business students, but also I'm trying to have a pilot a climate teacher professional learning community. And this looks like a set of tools, questions, and tools that I could potentially integrate there. So I've got 2 avenues to try these things out.
I think if we have just a minute, there was one other question in the chat. I don't know if Ruthie saw or addressed it yet, but the thinking about elementary educators, is this good at the elementary level?
Oh, I'm so glad that you brought that up, Katie, because I totally missed that in the chat. So I'm sorry, Eric. Yeah, so the page, it's called For Educators Grades 6 through 12, because kind of in this first iteration, we were thinking, what's the lowest hanging fruit, in terms of audience, in terms of making things like the Yale climate opinion maps accessible. Who is going to be able to kind of grasp onto that the best first. And we decided that really middle school and high school are going to be best able to work with the research and the tools that we have. However, something that we have actually in the blurb that's on the landing page, that For Educators page, is, look, like, we designed these for a middle and high school audience, but we encourage you to use sites like simplypdf.com to convert PDFs to Word documents so that you can adjust them to your students and to your learner audience as needed. And especially the Yale Climate Connection story, I think there's a lot of potential to show those radio stories and have discussions about those and use some of those activities with elementary audiences. And we've actually heard back from a couple of elementary school teachers who have used the Yale Climate Connections activities with elementary school that have worked well. So yeah, it was purely a bandwidth decision. And so that's just kind of why we started with the 6th through 12th grade audience. But we absolutely do believe that, climate change is something that can be taught across content areas, across grade levels, across age ranges and learner levels, and all that good stuff.
That's exactly how the Clean Collection started. It was a middle school, high school, and undergraduate level collection, and has only recently been expanded to the elementary level.
There you go.
Okay, so we are at the top of the hour. So thank you very much, Ruthie, and everyone else for participating today. And if there's no other comments or questions, we will call the end of our discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks again, Ruthie and everyone.
Thank you.